Something in the barn made the dog go crazy, and his barking cut through the early morning like a desperate warning. Following the animal, the farmer found an injured woman, fallen between hay and blood. He brought her inside without knowing. She carried dangerous secrets and a past capable of destroying them both. That night, solitude became a trench, and love, a choice in the midst of war. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Will continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The sun beat down mercilessly on that forgotten piece of the American Southwest. The cracked earth stretched as far as the eye could see, revealing a landscape of drought and abandonment. Between the dust dancing in the air and the almost absolute silence, a small farm stood as a witness to a time long gone. Jack woke with the first ray of sunlight, as he had done every day for more than 15 years. His aching muscles and calloused hands betrayed a life of hard work. His face, marked by time, showed no emotion as he rose from his simple bed. He put on his worn boots, ran his hand through his graying hair, and walked to the porch of the house. Apollo, his old yellowish dog, was already waiting for him with attentive eyes. He was the only company Jack allowed in his life. Man and animal understood each other in a silent agreement of mutual loyalty. "Good morning, old friend," Jack murmured, stroking the dog's ears. "Another day, isn't it?" The routine was always the same. Strong coffee in a metal mug, hard bread with butter, the creaking of the rocking chair while observing the horizon. Then the work, checking the fences, feeding the few remaining animals, trying to extract something from the land that seemed to have forgotten how to flourish. That morning, however, Apollo was different. Restless, the dog went back and forth, from the porch to the gate, barking occasionally, as if trying to communicate something. "What is it, Apollo? See something?" The dog continued his unusual behavior, now pulling at the hem of Jack's pants with his teeth. All right. Let's see what's bothering you." Jack grabbed his faded straw hat and followed the animal, which ran ahead, occasionally stopping to ensure his owner was following. They walked for almost half an hour, moving away from the house toward the most distant boundary of the property, where a small grove of twisted trees resisted the dryness. It was there that Jack found her. A woman fallen under the sparse shade of a leafless mesquite tree. Her body seemed fragile, her dress torn and dirty with soil. As he approached, he noticed she was breathing with difficulty, her face marked by scrapes. Without hesitation, Jack took her in his arms. She was as light as a child and her body was hot with fever. Apollo circled the two as if standing guard. "Easy now, miss. Everything's going to be all right now." The return to the house was slower. Jack felt the weight of responsibility in his arms. It had been years since he'd allowed strangers into his home. The outside world was a distant memory that he preferred to keep that way. Distant. In the simple house, Jack improvised a bed in the living room with clean sheets he kept in a chest. He cleaned her wounds with water and herbs he knew, gave her water with a spoon, and waited. Apollo lay down beside the improvised bed, his eyes fixed on the stranger, as if he had taken on the mission of protecting her. A whole day passed before she opened her eyes. When she finally did, she was immediately startled. She tried to get up, frightened, but the pain made her retreat. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "You're safe," Jack replied, keeping his distance. "I found you, unconscious at the edge of my land. You've been sleeping for a day." She looked around, assessing the simple environment, the attentive dog, the rustic-looking man who maintained a neutral expression. His eyes, however, reflected a fear that Jack knew well. "Thank you," she finally said. "My name is Helen." "Jack," he replied dryly, "when you're feeling better, you can tell me what you were doing passed out on my property." Helen nodded, but her eyes said that was a story she wasn't ready to tell. The first days were filled with silence and adaptation. Helen slowly recovered her strength, while Jack maintained his routine, only adding the care of the stranger. He left food, clean water, and homemade remedies within her reach, but avoided long conversations. Apollo, on the other hand, had become Helen's faithful guardian. The dog, normally reserved with strangers, spent hours by her side, as if he sensed that they both shared some kind of pain. On the 5th day, Helen managed to get up on her own. Jack found her in the kitchen, trying to prepare something. "You don't need to do that," he said, surprised. "I need to repay you somehow," she replied with determination. "I can't be a burden." Something in that woman's dignity touched Jack. There was a strength in her that contrasted with her apparent physical fragility. "Do you know plants?" he asked, breaking his own code of keeping distance. "Yes," Helen smiled for the first time. "My grandmother taught me about herbs and flowers since I was little. I have a garden in the back. It's poorly kept, but maybe you can help." That silent invitation to stay was the beginning of a subtle transformation on the forgotten farm. Helen, though still weakened, began to care for the small garden. Her delicate but firm hands seemed to awaken life where before there was only abandonment. Jack observed her from a distance, intrigued by the woman who spoke to plants and smiled at the sun as if they were old friends. There was a light in her that he had forgotten existed in the world. 2 weeks passed like this. The initial silence gave way to short conversations during meals. Helen would talk about the plants she knew, about the stars she identified in the night sky. Jack in turn shared knowledge about the land, the weather, the animals. What neither of them mentioned was the past. It was like a tacit agreement. The present was the only time allowed in that house. One afternoon, while Helen was harvesting tomatoes that were beginning to ripen in the renewed garden, Jack surprised her by bringing a package. "I found this in town," he said, handing her a brown paper parcel. "I thought you might need it." Helen opened the package with curiosity. Inside was a simple floral cotton dress, some undergarments, and a wooden comb. "Jack," she murmured, moved. "You didn't have to." "The woman at the store helped me with the sizes," he explained, embarrassed. "Your clothes are very worn out." That simple gesture represented something greater. It was an acknowledgement that Helen was not just a temporary presence. She had somehow become part of that place. That night, wearing the new dress, Helen prepared a special meal with vegetables from the garden. They sat at the table, and for the first time Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the sensation of sharing a home. After dinner, while washing the dishes side by side, their hands touched briefly. A fleeting contact that made both of them recoil, surprised by their own reaction. That's when they heard Apollo barking insistently in the yard, a different bark of alert. Jack grabbed a lantern and went out to check, with Helen following at a safe distance. The dog was agitated, growling at the darkness beyond the fence. Jack raised the light, trying to see what was disturbing the animal. "See something, Apollo?" The dog continued barking, but nothing was visible in the moonless night. "Must be some wild animal," Jack said, but his voice betrayed concern. Helen remained motionless, her face suddenly pale. Her eyes scanned the shadows with a fear that went beyond the natural fear of the unknown. "Let's go inside," insisted Jack, noticing her terror. "We'll lock everything up." Back in the safety of the adobe walls, Helen seemed even more frightened. Her hands trembled as she helped close the windows. "Helen," Jack called softly, "is there something you want to tell me?" She hesitated, biting her lower lip, the fear in her eyes now mixed with shame. She began, but was interrupted by a new bark from Apollo. This time, the sound was accompanied by heavy steps on the porch. Someone was knocking on the door forcefully. "We know she's in there," shouted an authoritative male voice from the other side. "Open this door." Helen's heart raced. Her eyes, now wide with terror, sought Jack's in a silent plea for help. The man, in turn, put his finger to his own lips, indicating that she should be quiet. "Stay here," he whispered, as he picked up an old shotgun he kept near the door. The knocking continued, growing stronger. Apollo growled, the fur on his neck bristling, ready to defend his territory. "Last chance, open up or we'll break down the door," the voice threatened. Jack took a deep breath, adjusted his hat on his head, and opened the door just enough to position himself in the gap, blocking the view of the interior with his body. Apollo stood by his side, teeth bared. Outside, 3 men were waiting. 2 of them wore clothes that betrayed a certain wealth, despite the dust from the road. The third, younger, looked like an employee, uncomfortable with the situation. "Can I help you?" asked Jack, his firm voice contrasting with the inner turmoil. "We're looking for a woman," said the man who seemed to lead the group. He had a proud bearing and a well-trimmed mustache. "Helen Montgomery, heiress of the Montgomery family. She disappeared almost a month ago from Blackwood Ranch, property of her fiancé, Edward Blackwood." Jack kept his expression impassive, though his mind quickly processed the information. Helen was a Montgomery? The family was known throughout the state for their lands and political influence. "I don't know any Helen," he replied dryly. "I live alone here." The mustached man stepped forward, challenging. "We have information that a woman matching her description was seen in this area. Your dog just growled at someone inside the house. I demand that you let us in." "My dog growls at any stranger," Jack retorted, "and on my land, only those I invite come in. You're not invited." The second man, more burly and aggressive-looking, stepped forward. "Listen here, hillbilly. Do you know who you're talking to? Mr. Blackwood is not a man to be crossed. If we find out you're hiding his fiancée—" "I don't know of any fiancée," interrupted Jack, his hand firm on the shotgun's stock. "And now I ask that you leave my property. It's getting dark and the road is dangerous at night." The men looked at each other, assessing the situation. Apollo continued to growl, increasingly threatening. "We'll be back," guaranteed the mustached man. "With the police if necessary. Mr. Blackwood has powerful friends." "Safe travels," replied Jack, impassive. Only when the sound of horses disappeared, in the distance, did Jack close the door and lock it. His face, previously a mask of serenity, now revealed concern. Helen was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, trembling. "They found me," she murmured, her voice broken by fear. "Edward found me." Jack sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's time for you to tell me your story, Helen Montgomery." She nodded, wiping away a stubborn tear. "Yes, I'm a Montgomery. My father, August Montgomery, managed the family lands in West Texas. I grew up among cotton fields and business meetings. When he fell ill 2 years ago, my uncle Robert took over the business." Helen paused as if gathering courage to continue. "My uncle had different plans for the family fortune. He wanted to expand, modernize, take risks that my father would never accept. For that, he needed alliances. That's when Edward Blackwood appeared, heir to an emerging family in agribusiness." "And you were the bargaining chip," concluded Jack. Helen nodded, a bitter smile on her lips. "The perfect marriage, according to my uncle. Edward would gain the prestige of the Montgomery name, and my uncle the capital he needed for his projects. Nobody consulted me, of course. They just announced my engagement during my father's funeral." Jack felt a knot in his throat. He knew, well, the world of the powerful and their unscrupulous negotiations. "I resisted at first," continued Helen. "I said I wouldn't marry a man I barely knew. That's when I discovered who Edward really was." Her hands trembled as she recalled. "He seemed educated, charming in public, but alone he was controlling, possessive. Everything had to be his way. If I disagreed, first came the punitive silence, then the cruel words. When neither worked, she lifted the sleeve of her dress, revealing marks that were beginning to disappear but were still visible. "The week before I fled, he locked me up for 3 days in a room at Blackwood Ranch, without proper food, saying I needed to learn my place. That's when I realized that if I married him, I would never be free again." Jack involuntarily clenched his fists, a sudden anger taking over his chest. "How did you escape?" "With the help of the ranch cook. She gave me simple clothes, some money, and directed me away from town. I walked for days, avoiding main roads. The money ran out, the food too. Then a heavy rain caught me unprepared that night. I remember falling, exhausted, and then I only woke up here, with you and Apollo." Silence settled between them like a dense fog. Outside, the wind began to blow, rattling the poorly fitted windows of the old house. "They won't give up," said Jack finally. "Men like your fiancé don't accept losing." "I know," replied Helen, her voice now firmer, "and I can't put you in danger. I'll leave in the morning." "To where?" The question hung in the air. Helen had no answer. "Stay," said Jack, surprising himself. "At least until we have a better plan. I know these Badlands like the back of my hand. I can hide you." Helen's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Why are you helping me, Jack? You barely know me." The man looked away as if the answer was hidden in the shadows of the room. "Maybe because I know what it's like to run from a past that insists on chasing us." That night they slept in separate rooms, but with the same thought. The danger that surrounded them was real and growing. The next morning, Jack woke up even earlier than usual. The sky was beginning to clear, painting the horizon in orange tones when he went out to check the surroundings of the property. Apollo accompanied him, alert to every movement in the shadows that remained from the night. Upon returning, he found Helen in the kitchen, preparing coffee. There was something different about her. A new determination shone in her eyes. "I'm not going to run anymore," she announced, as she served strong coffee in Jack's mug. "I'm going to face Edward, but in my own way and in my own time." Jack nodded, respecting her decision. "What do you need?" "First, I need to better understand my rights, my father's inheritance. I'm sure there are documents my uncle hid from me. If I can prove that I'm the legitimate heir, I'll have legal grounds to defend myself." "There's a notary office in the village," commented Jack. "Old Sebastian knows all the important families in the region. He might be able to help." "It would be risky to go there now," pondered Helen. "Edward's men must be watching." "I have a friend who can go for us," replied Jack. "Anthony from the store. He's the one who helped me with your clothes. He's a trustworthy man." As they planned the next steps, Helen observed Jack with growing curiosity. There was much more to this rustic man than appeared at first glance. The way he spoke, his connections, the knowledge he occasionally demonstrated. He wasn't a simple, isolated countryman. "Jack," she finally asked, "who are you really?" He paused, the mug suspended in the air. His eyes met Helen's, and for an instant she saw in them an ocean of untold stories. "A man trying to forget who he once was," he replied enigmatically. Before Helen could insist, Apollo began to bark furiously in the yard. Jack ran to the window. In the distance, a cloud of dust announced visitors. "They're coming back," he murmured, grabbing his shotgun. "And it doesn't seem like they've come just to talk this time." Helen felt her blood freeze in her veins. Through the window she could distinguish at least 5 horsemen approaching. One of them, in front, rode an imposing black horse. "It's Edward," she whispered, recognizing her fiancé's silhouette. "He came personally." Jack quickly assessed the situation. There were too many men to face alone, even armed. "There's an underground passage," he said hastily, "built by the former owners of this land to escape during times of conflict. It starts in the barn and goes to the dry creek, about a mile from here." Helen looked at him, surprised by this revelation. "How do you know that?" "Later," cut Jack. "Now I need you to take only the essentials and follow me. Quick." While Helen gathered her few belongings, Jack went to an old chest in the bedroom. From there, he took a medallion with a luxurious coat of arms that he had kept for years. He hesitated for a moment, then put it in his pocket. Perhaps it was time to face his own past. They ran to the barn through the back of the house. Apollo followed alongside them, still barking at the approaching intruders. In the barn, Jack removed some hay bales, revealing an almost invisible trapdoor in the packed earth floor. "Go straight ahead and don't stop," he instructed, handing Helen a small lantern. "I'll delay them and then meet you at the creek." "No," protested Helen, holding his arm. "I won't let you face them alone." Their gazes met again, and this time something new passed between them. A spark, a recognition. "Trust me?" asked Jack, his voice softer. "It's not the first time I've faced men like Edward Blackwood." Helen hesitated, then on impulse came closer and lightly touched Jack's face. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded, helping her down through the trapdoor. Apollo, contrary to all expectations, jumped down to join Helen. "He will protect you," said Jack. "Apollo knows the way." As he closed the trapdoor and covered it again with hay, Jack heard the horses approaching the farm gate. He took a deep breath, checked his shotgun, and walked out of the barn. On the horizon, dark clouds were beginning to form. A storm was approaching both in the sky and on the arid land that Jack called home. Jack walked slowly to the yard, the shotgun resting on his shoulder with apparent casualness. He stopped in front of the house, waiting for the unwelcome visitors. The wind was now blowing stronger, bringing the smell of imminent rain. The group of horsemen stopped a few yards from him. Edward Blackwood dismounted with studied elegance. He was a tall man, with aristocratic features and eyes as cold as ice stones. He wore fine clothes despite the dust from the road, and his gold watch gleamed on his wrist when he gestured. "You must be the hillbilly who's sheltering my fiancée," he said, advancing a few steps. "Where is Helen?" Jack didn't move. "I don't know your fiancée, sir. As I already told your men yesterday, I live alone here." Edward smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's make things easier. I know Helen is here. I have witnesses who saw her on this property. She's a disturbed woman, you know. Had a nervous breakdown after her father's death. She needs medical care." "Interesting theory," replied Jack, impassive. "But as I said, I'm alone." Edward made a gesture and two men dismounted, walking toward the house. "We'll check if you don't mind." "I do mind." Jack adjusted the shotgun in his hands. "This is my property. You have no right to enter without my permission." The men hesitated, looking at Edward for instructions. "Mr. Jack, isn't it?" Edward took another step forward, changing tactics. "I don't want trouble. I just want my fiancée back. I can reward you generously for your silence." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I'm not selling anything, Mr. Blackwood." Edward's smile disappeared completely. "Do you know who I am? I can ruin your life with a snap of my fingers. I have judges, politicians, and entire ranchers on my payroll. What do you think will happen to this forgotten piece of land when I decide I want it?" Lightning cut across the sky, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was rapidly approaching. "I've faced more frightening men than you," replied Jack, his calm voice contrasting with the tension of the moment. "Men who really knew who I was." Something in Jack's posture made Edward hesitate. There was a natural authority in that simple-looking man, a confidence that didn't match his isolated lifer. "Who are you, anyway?" asked Edward, intrigued. "Someone who knows how to recognize a coward when he sees one," replied Jack. "A real man doesn't chase a woman who rejects him, doesn't hurt her to show power." Edward turned pale with anger. "You know nothing about me or Helen. She belongs to me by right, by the agreement we made with her family. People aren't property, Mr. Blackwood, not even Montgomery women." The first drops of rain began to fall, thick and heavy. The sky was almost black now, making the middle of the afternoon resemble twilight. "You'll regret this," hissed Edward. "Search everything," he ordered his men. "Find Helen and bring her to me." Jack raised the shotgun, pointing it directly at Edward. "Take one more step and we'll have a serious problem." The men froze, uncertain. Edward, however, smiled with contempt. "You won't shoot, it's just a bluff." The rain increased in intensity, quickly turning into a downpour. The horses whinnied, restless. "Try me," challenged Jack. Something in his look must have convinced Edward as the man took a step back. "This isn't over," he guaranteed. "I'll be back with the police. You'll be arrested for kidnapping, and Helen will return to where she belongs." "Do what you think is best," replied Jack. "Now get off my land before this rain gets worse and you're stuck here." Reluctantly, Edward remounted his horse. The rain was now falling in dense curtains, soaking everyone. "This is your last chance," he shouted through the storm. "Hand over Helen and I'll forget you exist." Jack remained motionless, the shotgun still raised. Edward made a gesture of contempt and turned his horse. The group departed, gradually disappearing into the curtain of rain. Only when he was sure they had left did Jack lower the weapon. He was soaked to the bone, but he didn't care. His mind was focused on finding Helen. He ran to the barn and went down through the trapdoor. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing him to bend over as he advanced in the darkness. The smell of damp earth filled the air, and occasionally he heard the noise of water starting to seep through the ceiling. "The tunnel may not hold with this rain," he muttered to himself, quickening his pace. After what seemed like an eternity, Jack finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. The exit was partially covered by bushes and stones, exactly as he remembered. He emerged under the storm, in the bed of the creek that would normally be dry, but was now beginning to accumulate rainwater. He looked around, anxious. "Helen!" he called, his voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. "Helen!" There was no response. Jack felt his heart speed up. What if she had gotten lost? What if the creek, now receiving water from the rain, had swept her away? A distant bark caught his attention. Apollo. He followed the sound, fighting against the current that was already beginning to form in the old dry bed. He found them sheltered, under a rocky overhang. Helen was huddled, hugging Apollo, both wet but safe. "Jack!" she exclaimed upon seeing him, the relief evident in her voice. "Thank God you're all right." He joined them under the improvised shelter, breathless. "Edward. And his men are gone, at least for now," he informed. "But they'll be back probably with the police." Helen nodded, trembling from cold and tension. "What will we do now?" Jack took the medallion from his pocket and held it out to her. "Do you know this symbol?" Helen took the object, examining it with curiosity. It was an ancient, silver medallion with a complex coat of arms engraved, a falcon flying over a sword crossed with a feather. "It's the Westbrook family crest," she replied, surprised. "One of the oldest and most powerful families in the country. They had lands the size of small countries, political influence, but they fell from grace about 15 years ago after the heir was accused of—" Her voice faded when understanding hit her. She looked at Jack with new eyes. "And you are—" "John Henry Westbrook," he confirmed, using his real name for the first time in years. "The heir who supposedly fled with the family money, leaving them in ruins." Helen covered her mouth with her hands, shocked. "But everyone thought you had passed from this world. There was a huge scandal. They said you had embezzled the family fortune and fled abroad." "That's what my Uncle Frank wanted everyone to think," replied Jack, or rather John Henry. "The truth is that I discovered he had been diverting money for years, doing illegal business using the family name. When I confronted him, he framed me, made it look like I was the traitor." The rain continued to fall mercilessly, creating a curtain of water around the small rocky shelter. "I had to disappear," he continued. "My own father believed Frank's lies. The press condemned me without trial. Friends abandoned me. So I became Jack, a simple man with no past or future." Helen looked at him, fascinated and moved by that revelation. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I understand what you're going through. I know what it's like to have your name, your identity, your life stolen by people who should protect you." He took a deep breath. "And because maybe it's time for both of us to stop running and start fighting." A glimmer of hope appeared in Helen's eyes. "How?" "I have evidence against my uncle. Documents I've kept all these years, waiting for the right moment. With them, I can clear my name and recover what rightfully belongs to me. And that can help me face Edward and my uncle. The Westbrooks and the Montgomerys were always allies in the past. If I return and claim my place, I can help you do the same." Helen reflected for a moment, then squeezed the medallion in her hand. "Then that's what we'll do. Together." The look they exchanged sealed a pact that went beyond words. Two disinherited heirs, two fugitives, united by similar tragic circumstances. "The key." "Rain is easing," observed John Henry after a while. "We need to move. Edward will return with reinforcements, and we can't be here when that happens." "Where will we go?" "To Chicago. I know people who can help us, journalists who owe me favors, lawyers who never believed in my guilt. Chicago is days of travel from here," pondered Helen. "How will we get there without being discovered?" John Henry smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen on his face. "There's a train station 2 days' walk from here. From there, we can head to the city. I have money saved for emergencies like this." The rain was now just a fine drizzle. The sky was beginning to clear on the horizon, announcing that the storm had passed. "We'll need supplies," said Helen, already thinking. "Practically. And dry clothes." "We can't go back to the farm now," replied John Henry. "It's the first place they'll look. I know an abandoned hunting cabin a few hours from here. We can shelter there tonight and continue our journey in the morning." Apollo stood up, shaking the water from his fur, apparently eager to depart. "He seems to agree with the plan," smiled Helen, stroking the dog. "Apollo has always had good survival instincts," replied John Henry, getting up. It was he who found me when I arrived on these lands, wounded and hopeless, an abandoned puppy who became my only friend. Helen rose too, her eyes now firm with new determination. "Not anymore," she said softly, touching his arm. "You're not alone anymore, John Henry." The sound of his real name on her lips triggered a wave of emotions that he had repressed for years. It was as if a part of him, long dormant, was awakening again. They walked side by side with Apollo in front, tracing a path through the landscape transformed by the rain. The arid land now displayed shades of green, small plants awakening with the sudden moisture. "It's as if the desert is being reborn," commented Helen, marveling at the transformation. "They say in these badlands, everything that seems dead is just waiting for the right moment to bloom again," replied John Henry, his gaze crossing with hers significantly. As they advanced through the wet earth, leaving behind the farm that had been both refuge and prison, both felt that despite the dangers ahead, something new and promising had begun to sprout between them, a seed of hope planted in soil that, until then, had seemed infertile for dreams. 6 months passed since that storm that changed the course of their lives. The late afternoon sun bathed the renovated farm's porch with golden tones, while Helen carefully watered the potted flowers that now decorated the previously empty space. Apollo, grayer but still alert, rested lazily in the shade, watching his mistress with attentive and devoted eyes. The property was unrecognizable. New fences delimited the land. The house had received a new coat of paint and a sturdy roof. Around it, a lush garden provided fresh food, and small fruit trees were beginning to establish themselves, promising future harvests. The land, once arid and abandoned, now displayed patches of green that spread like materialized hope. Helen smiled upon hearing the sound of approaching footsteps. John Henry, who now used his real name again, was returning from the neighboring village bringing mail and supplies. "Good news," he announced, placing the packages on the porch table and handing an envelope to Helen. "The deed to the Montgomery estate is officially in your name. The lands that belonged to your father have been legally transferred to you." Helen opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes quickly scanning the official document that symbolized her final victory over the past. "I can't believe we actually succeeded," she murmured, moved. John Henry sat beside her, a satisfied smile on his face, now less hardened by years of isolation. "Your Uncle Robert had no choice after the investigations revealed the fraud scheme he was maintaining. And as for Edward—" "I'd rather not even mention that name," interrupted Helen, though without bitterness in her voice. "It's past, a past that no longer has power over me." The path to that moment of peace had been arduous and full of obstacles. The journey to Chicago, in those days after the storm, was just the beginning of a legal and personal battle that required courage from both. John Henry had faced his own ghosts by reassuming his identity. With the help of former allies and the E-Time documents he had kept for years, he managed to prove his innocence and expose his Uncle Frank's machinations. The Westbrook family fortune, or what remained of it, was partially recovered, allowing him to start a new life, no longer as the heir to an empire, but as a man who had chosen his own path. Helen, in turn, had faced both her uncle and Edward in court. The process was exhausting, with attempts at intimidation and defamation campaigns in the press. Edward, especially, had used all resources to try to discredit her, painting her as mentally unstable and ungrateful. The turning point came when other women emerged with similar accounts of Edward's abusive behavior. Employees of Blackwood Ranch testified about the episodes of violence they had witnessed. The empire of lies began to crumble, and Edward Blackwood saw his name and reputation destroyed by the very behavior he had tried to hide. "I still have nightmares sometimes," confessed Helen, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "I dream that I'm trapped in that ranch, or that I'm running without being able to escape." John Henry covered her hand with his, a gesture of comfort that had become natural between them. "The nightmares will diminish with time," he assured. "Mine have diminished too." She turned her hand, intertwining her fingers with his. What had begun as a survival alliance had blossomed into something deeper during those months of shared struggle. There wasn't a specific moment when they realized what was happening between them. It was a gradual transformation, like that of the land around them, which one day they realized had already occurred. "I received a letter from the school too," commented Helen, changing the subject. "They accepted my proposal to teach botany and literature to the village children." "They're lucky to have you as a teacher," smiled John Henry. "Just as I was lucky to have Apollo finding me that day," she replied, looking fondly at the dog, who, upon hearing his name, perked up his ears attentively. The animal had become a living symbol of the journey they shared. It was Apollo who found Helen unconscious, who protected her during the escape through the tunnel, who remained vigilant during the uncertain nights in Chicago. Now, with advancing age, he enjoyed tranquil days under the Texas sun, but maintained the watchful look that characterized him. "Speaking of luck," said John Henry, taking another envelope from his pocket, "I have a surprise for you." Helen opened the envelope, finding 2 train tickets. "New York?" she asked, intrigued. "I thought we deserved a proper celebration. We'll spend a week in the city, visiting museums, theaters, restaurants, anything you want." Helen's eyes sparkled with excitement. Since they returned to the Badlands, after resolving legal matters in Chicago, they hadn't left the farm they now called home. "When do we leave?" "Next week, if that's all right with you. Anthony and his wife will keep an eye on the property and take care of Apollo." Helen stood up impulsively and hugged John Henry, who responded by wrapping her in his strong arms. They remained like this for a moment, absorbing the sensation of security and belonging they had built together. When they separated, John Henry kept his hands on her shoulders, his gaze suddenly serious. "Helen, there's something I've been wanting to ask you for some time." She felt her heart speed up, recognizing the tone in his voice. "These months with you have brought life back to this place and to me. I can no longer imagine waking up without seeing your smile, without hearing your voice, without sharing." Breakfast on the porch. Helen smiled, tears of happiness threatening to overflow. "I'm doing this all wrong," he laughed, nervous. "I had planned to do this in New York, in some romantic place, but—" "John," she interrupted softly, "I don't need romantic places. I just need you." He took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Helen Montgomery, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because of family arrangements or external interests, but because we chose each other, freely." "Yes," she answered without hesitation, tears now flowing freely down her face. 1,000 times, yes. The kiss that sealed that promise was witnessed only by the setting sun, by old Apollo, and by the flowers that Helen had planted on the first day she arrived on that land, now fully bloomed, vibrant and victorious against all odds. In the Ihe, weeks that followed, news of the marriage between John Henry Westbrook and Helen Montgomery spread through the village and beyond. Many were surprised to learn that the reclusive Jack was, in fact, the Westbrook heir everyone thought had disappeared years ago. Others marveled at the story of overcoming and new beginnings that the two represented. The wedding was celebrated in spring, when the desert was at its greenest and most generous. It was a simple ceremony held in the yard of the farm, decorated with wildflowers and lantern lights. The guests were few, only true friends and people who had supported them in difficult times. Anthony and his family, old notary Sebastian, journalists who helped expose the truth, lawyers who fought for their cause, and children from the village where Helen now taught. Apollo, with an improvised tie around his neck, remained by their side throughout the ceremony, like the faithful guardian he had always been. The vows they exchanged spoke not of possession or obedience, but of freedom and choice. They promised to respect each other's individuality, support mutual dreams, and never forget the value of autonomy for which they had fought so hard. "Our love is not a prison," declared Helen, "but a space where we can both grow freely, side by side. And our home will always be a refuge," complimented John Henry, "not just for us, but for all who need safety and a new beginning." This last promise materialized in the years that followed. The farm, once isolated and forgotten, became a center of renewal for the community. Helen established an informal school on weekends, teaching not only children but also adults who never had the opportunity to study. John Henry, in turn, introduced sustainable farming techniques that helped small farmers face the periodic droughts of the region. The couple never sought to recover the power or status their families had in the past. Instead, they used the knowledge and resources they possessed to transform the reality around them. The farm became known as a place where broken people could find healing, where exhausted land could regenerate, where new possibilities could flourish. 5 years after their wedding, on an afternoon similar to the one when they met, John Henry found Helen on the porch contemplating the sunset with a serene smile. By her side, Apollo rested peacefully, now a very old dog but still devoted to his owners. At her feet, a 4-year-old girl was drawing intently, her dark curls swaying with the breeze. "What are you thinking about?" asked John Henry, sitting beside his wife. "About how surprising life is," replied Helen, observing their daughter with infinite love in her eyes. "About how the place where I thought I would find only a brief refuge became my true home. About how the man who saved me when I was almost lifeless ended up being saved by me too." John Henry smiled, recognizing the truth in those words. They had saved each other in ways that went far beyond the physical. Little Aurora raised her, drawing, proudly showing what she had created. A colorful house surrounded by flowers, with 3 figures holding hands and a dog at their side. "It's our family," she announced with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Helen and John Henry exchanged a moved look. Yes, they were a family, built not by blood or by social arrangements, but by daily choices, by shared overcoming, by conscious and free love. That night, as the stars appeared in the Texas sky, the farm that had once been a symbol of isolation and pain radiated light and life. The seeds planted in land previously considered infertile had not only survived, they had prospered beyond any expectation. And so, between the memory of the past and the promise of the future, Helen and John Henry continued their journey. No longer as fugitives, but as builders of a new path, a path where pain was not forgotten but transformed, where scars were not hidden but integrated into the story they continued to write together, day after day, choice after choice, love after love. Dear listeners, we hope that Helen and John Henry's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about new beginnings and overcoming. Find it here, clicking to the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of new beginnings. Don't miss our upcoming content. We'll be waiting for you.